Welcome, everybody, to our Sound for Video session. Today's the 11th of August, 2019. It is a question and answer session, so we're going to go ahead and bump over to our questions, and let's dive in right away. If you have any other additional questions, of course, go ahead and leave those up in the chat there, and we'll do our best to get to those. All right, first up, we have a question here from Jeffrey B. Can you show us how to connect a lav mic like a Mic J044 first to a Zoom F4, and then secondly to a Mix Pre 3? Yes. So first of all, Jeffrey, you said on the Zoom F4 you were trying to use the 5.6 input. That input is actually more of a camera return, and I believe it's line level. So I don't believe there's a good way to make that work. The plug-in power setting in the menu, I believe, is if you attach the 2 XLR and one 3.5 millimeter add-on module. So there's that proprietary connector on the back. Let's see, here it is. I can show you a picture. So on the back of the F4, it's this this blue connector here. You can add that add-on module that allows you to add 2 more XLR mics. I believe that's what the Phantom or the plug-in power specifically setting. I believe it turns it on there. I don't believe it turns it on for the camera return. So having that out of the way, you can use an XLR. So I assume you're using the Rode VXLR adapter. Rode also makes a VXLR Plus, and you will need the VXLR Plus in this case, and you'll need to send phantom power. So you'll plug it into an XLR input, and then you can attach the 3.5 millimeter into the VXLR Plus, turn the phantom power on for that channel. It will convert the phantom power down to plug-in power for the Mic J044 or whatever lavalier microphone you're using, which has a 3.5 millimeter TRS plug. So that's going to be the way you'll want to do that on both the Zoom F4 and the Mix Pre 3. Same thing on both cases. So hopefully that makes sense. And then you also say, can you direct me to your setup guides for the F4 and the Mix Pre? Yes, I'll put some links to those down below. I have a Mix Pre course, the Zoom F4 course. People have asked me about that over and over again, and I had some things come up where I haven't finished it yet, but it is scheduled to be not this week, but next week. I will be working on finalizing the Zoom F4 course, and so I'll alert everybody here at the school as soon as that's available. All right, great. Thank you, Jeffrey, for the questions. All right, next up from Holger, we have a couple questions. As you know, I'm using the Audio-Technica AT4053B as my main mic for educational videos in my home studio and the Mix Pre 3. I would sleep better if I had a backup solution if something... sorry, 1 second here, peeps. My little windows here for the live streaming app are in the way of reading the question, so we're going to do that again. All right, now I can see. I would sleep better if I had a backup solution if something goes wrong with it. Furthermore, I need a mic for outdoor shooting interviews and vlogging. In those cases, I will probably record directly in camera, or I will use a small portable recorder. Most people I see are using the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus for that purpose. If I remember correctly, you made a YouTube video about this one and the Deity VMic D3 Pro. Both cost the same in Germany. Which one of those two or another would you recommend? Ideally, it would match pretty close with my AT4053B regarding audio characteristics. And let's pause there. We'll answer that one first. If I can only choose one of those, for most purposes, I would probably choose the Deity D3 Pro. But there are trade-offs. They're a little bit different, and everyone's taste in terms of which of those mics they prefer the sound of is a little different. They both sound actually quite good to me. I think that honestly, the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus probably favors my voice more than the Deity D3 Pro, but it's very close. And I think a lot of other people sound great on the Deity D3 Pro. So that's kind of a toss-up, but if I could only choose one, I'd probably go with the Deity D3 Pro. Do they sound exactly like the AT4053B? Not exactly, but I think it's pretty close. And so I think you could go with either one of them that way. But again, the D3 Pro would be my choice if I could only choose one. And the reason for that, I think, are a couple. Number one, I like that you can adapt it to XLR. It actually comes in a kit. I think it's called the Location Kit, that has the 3.5 millimeter to XLR adapter, and it is balanced. So it's it just gives you more options in the future. So if you did need to do a long cable run for some reason, it doesn't sound like you probably will do that, but if you ever needed that, it can do that. So that's my thought on that. Which small portable audio recorder would produce better sound? Oh, sorry. Yeah, which small and portable audio recorder would produce better sound quality than recording on the go in camera and match qualitatively with the above mentioned run and gun mic? If you're running and gunning, my overall thought is I don't know which camera you're using, but for example, with the GH5, I would just go with the GH5. I wouldn't add an additional recorder generally. If light and small and compact and convenient is the name of the game for that situation, then I would just skip it. Just use the D3 Pro and go into your camera. But if you do want a portable audio recorder, I think a Mix Pre 3 is a very good one, which you already have. So if you're looking for an additional one that's lower cost, I would probably, well, it's going to be tricky because you're coming from a Mix Pre 3, so your expectations are already very high. So it's hard to find a less expensive recorder that will sound as good as the Mix Pre 3. The closest I can think of, but it's not that much less expensive, is the Zoom F4. So, and it's definitely bigger than the Mix Pre 3. So I don't really, if you just want an interface, that's a little bit different. But if you want an actual recorder, Holger, I really don't know of any that are going to satisfy the taste that you've probably developed with your Mix Pre 3. So if you have more specific questions, go ahead and email me. I'm happy to take a look at that as well. But those are some thoughts there that hopefully will help you out a little bit. Kevin, the Basic Filmmaker, asks, rock on, dude. Could you explain the different gigahertz wireless frequency connectivity issues, at least in the US? What is the best? Why would I get a 2.4 gigahertz wire over a 5 gigahertz wireless? This is a good question. So we actually just posted a video today on my main channel on the Pico mic. So it's a small kit. It has 2 transmitters and with integrated microphones and a single receiver. So it's a dual channel receiver. And they're little clip-on transmitter microphones. And it uses the 2.4 gigahertz frequency range. To me, all of the systems that I've seen that operate in the 2.4 gigahertz frequency range, I would really consider either consumer or at best prosumer. 2.4 gigahertz, the reason that a lot of the consumer, maybe prosumer systems are using that is that they can produce one kit that works around the world. That can be used legally around the world at that frequency. Every country has its own different laws and regulations about which frequencies you can use without a license to do wireless transmission. And 2.4 gigahertz, because that's the same frequency range that Wi-Fi uses, can be used also for things like wireless microphones. So that's why a lot of them that you see are 2.4 gigahertz. Now, why aren't the pro systems using that? Well, because 2.4 gigahertz is a little bit risky in terms of overall saturation. Like if you have a lot of Wi-Fi going and you're trying to run wireless microphones in that same frequency range, there's only so much a very sophisticated frequency hopping scheme can do if there's a ton of Wi-Fi. At some point, you run out of bandwidth, and so there's just nowhere to transmit. Now, in my experience, they work pretty well. The 2.4 gigahertz wireless systems can work pretty well. Another downside they have, and actually I should say before I move on, a lot of the pro systems are working in ultra-high frequency, UHF. So they're down in the megahertz range. And that's the part that's kind of tricky because it depends on which part of the world you're in as to which UHF or megahertz frequencies you can use for transmitting wireless audio without a license. And so here in the US, for example, they've actually recently got rid of the 600 megahertz block, and now you have to operate, I believe it's four something, upper 400s, I believe, up until about 599. I think in 599. I don't know the exact details there, but those are the frequencies of the United States. It differs in other countries. The advantage of using those frequencies, from my understanding, is that you can generally make your way through barriers a lot easier with those lower frequencies. So just by the laws of physics, they can penetrate walls a little bit better. If you have somebody wearing a body pack transmitter on the back, in fact, if you look at the Pico mic review and a lot of the other 2.4 gigahertz systems reviews that I've done, when the transmitter is mounted on your back at any sort of distance, as soon as I turn around and face the camera and the transmitter is on my back, we drop the signal quite readily with the 2.4 gigahertz systems. With the UHF systems or the professional grade systems, generally you're not going to drop them as soon. So that's one thing. Now, you asked specifically, what about 2.4 gigahertz versus 5 gigahertz? My experience, I don't have a ton of experience with 5 gigahertz wireless. There are a few consumer-oriented systems that use 5 gigahertz to transmit audio. I believe that Ceramonic has one that I tried that didn't work very well for me. And that's another frequency that, at least in the United States, I know can be used also for Wi-Fi. That's even a higher frequency, and so that one has even more trouble when you're not exactly in line of sight. So that's the challenge with 5 gigahertz. So if it's between 5 gigahertz and 2.4, I'd probably go 2.4. The trade-off is that 2.4 is probably a little bit more saturated in terms of Wi-Fi than 5, but it does a little bit better, at least in theory, and every situation is going to differ a little bit, but at least in theory it does better in terms of being able to penetrate through barriers and things of that nature. So those are some thoughts there, Kevin. I hope that's helpful for you on that. Alan asked a question. These are not his exact words, but I wanted to show you something. So many of you may have heard that this week Blackmagic Design introduced a new camera, a new pocket camera, now a Pocket Cinema Camera 6K. It uses a larger sensor than the original 4K, which is a 4/3 sensor. Now it's a Super 35 size sensor. And it uses a Canon EF mount. But the thing that's intriguing is that they actually, let me just switch out of this here real quick. And I need to pull up my web browser. Here we go. Okay. Let me show you my screen there. Okay, you're seeing the screen now. So here's Blackmagic's new Pocket Cinema camera. Actually, they're showing both of them here on the same page. Here's the original 4K, and now they have the 6K. You can see using a larger Canon EF mount to accommodate the larger sensor. Looks like a pretty cool camera. In fact, I would say that the Pocket 4K, the original one, it's the camera I use most of the time now for most of my corporate work and for most of my YouTube videos. This one accepted here. For live streaming, I usually use a Panasonic GH5S. But in any case, all this marketing material, all the things they're telling you about, audio is awesome, they say. But this one caught my eye and actually caught Alan's eye, and we've been emailing back and forth about it. This says built-in timecode generator, which piqued my interest. Get fast multi-camera shoots in perfect sync. Professional cameras include, I'm just going to go ahead and read what they say here in the marketing material. Professional cameras include professional features, and you also get a built-in timecode generator, allowing shooting with more than one camera while keeping perfect sync. Simply plug in an external timecode generator, such as Tentacle Sync, into the 3.5mm audio jack, and the camera will automatically detect timecode and lock the internal generator. Now, each camera can start and stop recording with all the shots from all cameras, and all the shots from all cameras will have the same matched timecode. Imagine shooting a music festival with multiple roving cameras. Best of all, new DaVinci Resolve 16.1 will automatically find and sync the shots from all cameras, so you don't need to waste time sorting through thousands of shots. Let that sink in. I think there's a little bit of marketing misspeak there. Not that it's intentional. My sense is this. So in the CEO of Blackmagic, he did a presentation talking about this. And one thing he said specifically was, well, you can jam sync by plugging in, say, for example, a Tentacle Sync timecode generator, unplug it, and the camera will keep sync within a frame for 1 or 2 hours. To me, that says that really what's happening here is you can jam sync the camera's internal real-time clock which is not a timecode generator, and it will keep sync within a frame up to 2 hours, roughly. But if you want to remain in tight lock, you'll want to keep that tentacle sync connected or whatever timecode generator you're using. So my sense is that technically it does not have an inbuilt temperature compensated crystal oscillator, a proper timecode clock, highly accurate up to, less than, whatever 3 ppm per 8 hours or whatever is typically the spec you'll see on a quality timecode generator. This camera does not appear to have that. I think what they're saying is it has a proper timecode input. If you want to just jam sync and then walk away and stay within sync up to 2 hours within a frame, then that's fine. But if it doesn't have a temperature compensated crystal oscillator built into the camera. So that's my read on it, Alan. I'll do some testing with my 4K to see if that's the case. I don't have a need for the 6K right now. I'd love to get one to test it out and see how it goes, but I assume it's basically the same camera except with a larger sensor and a different mount, lens mount, but we'll see if I can get my hands on one without breaking the bank. So thanks for that, Alan. That was a good question. All right, let's go take a look at the questions that each of you bring here. Looks like we have a few people logged in. So hello, Laurent. It's good to see you. Peter, great to see you here again. Rashad, it's good to see you here. And Vincent again. All right, Laurent, just wrapped. Let's go ahead and add this to the broadcast here. Just wrapped, I had an issue on how to lava a guy that was shirtless with no sweatband or hat, so I ended up taping it from the back, but booming them as well. Anyway, I could have done it differently. Sometimes in the theater, if it depends on the shot. So if it's going to be a whole bunch of shots, and you're going to see the actor on both sides, that can be tricky. I think my first thought is if you're just going to see maybe a profile or not see the entire side, one side of their face, you could potentially hide it, kind of bring it up over the ear. And again, that's assuming you're not seeing the back, so you'd have to tape it up their neck and around one of the ears. And maybe bring it out just from the ear a little bit. That's the first thought that comes to my mind, but you could hide it up in the hair too, again, if you're not going to see the back. But that's about it. Otherwise, looks like it's a boom mic or a plant mic. A plant mic is another option potentially, but again, plant mics are, they're great, but they only work if the actor's in a certain spot. So those are some thoughts. Well, that's a tough one, Laurent. I hope the boom mic came out okay on that one. All right. Question from Film in 5D. For the Shure SM7B, I see you're using the thicker foam. I do as well for mine personally, but see a lot of others using the thinner one, especially for podcasts. Thoughts? Foam has a tendency to cut some of the high frequency. In light of the fact that I have a more sibilant voice, I use a thicker foam. If you have a darker voice, I think it would make more sense to use the thinner foam on the SM7B. So that's my main thought on that. If you have problems creating plosives, that's I think part of why they ship it with the thicker foam as well. So you can that will help a little bit more with plosives. That is the P's and B's. When a little puff of breath comes out and hits the microphone capsule directly, the thicker foam will diffuse that a little bit better. So those are my thoughts on when I might use each of them. All right. Next up from Mark. Hi from Australia. I have 3 G3 G4s and SKP 100 with no 48 volts. Got the Rode News Shooter kit in case of problems. It gives me 48 volt for shotgun booming, and what sold me was that it also accepts a lavalier microphone. Yeah, that is a pretty interesting option there. The News Shooter, I think, is that what you said? Yeah, the News Shooter. The News Shooter is cool because it has that plug on, the XLR plug on. And it does have 48 volt phantom power, but you can also have a lavalier microphone attached to it via a 3.5, so you have a couple of options there. It is transmitting via 2.4 gigahertz. What the interesting thing is those have worked really quite well for me. I have not had very many situations where it just didn't work. That's just been my experience in the locations where I'm working. I imagine in some denser populated urban areas that you might run into more issues. But Mark, if you're having a good experience with it, I think that is absolutely fantastic. And so I would keep it up. And if it's going well, it's going well. All right. And then Laurent Cooper, is it better if I replace my antennas on my G3 for better range? There's some information on that over at Wave Report. If you've ever heard of that site, just do a Google search for Wave Report. I think it's WAV Report. It was actually Andrew Jones, who is now with Deity Microphones, I think was one of the people that originally started that. He had to kind of step away when he went and joined Deity Microphones, but he did some coverage on upgrading your antennas for the G3 over on that site, so you might find those helpful. I've never done it myself, so I don't have a lot of knowledge on how it works. I believe what he was doing was he was actually exchanging, he was putting an SMA connector on there in lieu of the antenna, so he could put different antennas on there, kind of optimize them for the specific frequency he was using instead of using a more broadband type of antenna, which is built in. So there is hopefully there's some good information there that he can help you with. All right. Rashad, do you ever mic one person with two lavs just in case? For film, I generally don't, because we're not live streaming. So, and usually for narrative type work, it's you have to be careful. You don't want to encumber the actors too much. A lot of actors are already a little sensitive about wearing lavalier microphones. Some of them, depends on some are fine, some are a little bit less comfortable with it. But you would need two transmitters if you're going to do it wirelessly. So I see a lot of newscasts that do it. And so in cases where you're doing live work, that's where it probably makes a little bit more sense to do two lav mics. One is kind of redundant, so you basically have it totally attenuated, or that channel muted, or the secondary channel muted, and then you just bring that up if something happens to the first one. So you're kind of manually creating a kind of a backup option for yourself. So I think it definitely makes sense in live streaming situations, not as much for narrative or any sort of work where you're not live streaming. So it's a good question, Rashad. Thanks for that. Yeah, and LeBron says, yeah, more for sports. So again, which is generally going to be live as well. So definitely some good thoughts there. We don't have any other current questions, so let me tell you a little bit about a shoot I worked on yesterday. I'm working with my friends, Levi and Austin, again on another short film. In this case, it's going to be entered into the Road Reel contest. I'm looking forward to that. So it's I'm not going to tell you a lot about it because it'll be available before too much longer. By the end of the month, we have to have it up and finished and posted. So I'm not going to tell you a lot about it, but I can tell you a little bit about it. What was interesting about this project to me is that Austin, who directs, also writes all of the projects that we've worked on as a threesome. And in this case, he wrote a piece that is not dialogue driven by a long shot. It has one line of dialogue from the main character, and I think maybe two lines from a secondary character. It's just a short film. It's going to be 3 minutes or less. But what was interesting about that from a production sound perspective was that we didn't rely on the lavalier microphone a whole lot, again, because we haven't even shot the one. So there's the total of 3 lines of dialogue. We haven't even shot that scene yet. So yesterday we shot all of the other scenes that are going to be very much sound designed, a lot of Foley, a lot of sound effects, and things of that nature. So it was pretty exciting to work on that. And the challenge was it was shot in a kind of a urban, suburban neighborhood in a house, and just outside of the house. And there was a lot of noise. So I'm kind of interested to see how things turn out. Right now, Austin is doing the kind of the rough cut, and then then he'll get that over to me, and I'll do the post mix, of course. But we did pick up quite a lot of interference. It's just always astonishing to me how much, even in a suburban area, how much traffic there is. So how much racket cars make and trucks make and other vehicles make, and a lot of air traffic. Now, part of it too is I think back all of the projects that I've worked on with Austin and Levi have been shot on Saturdays, and so there may be a little bit more traffic through neighborhoods during the day on Saturdays than there, and lawnmowers and things of that nature. Definitely, I think lawnmowers are more common on the weekends. So there's a lot of that to contend with, and so it'll be interesting to see if we'll be able to use any of that we gathered during the production, or if we'll have to go back and replace some of it with other things. The cool thing is, though, we have this kind of blank palette or blank canvas that we can do almost anything we want with it. So if we do find that we're not happy with the production audio, replacing it is not as big of a deal as, say, for example, ADR. It's just a matter of getting some more ambiance, more room tone, more, all of the sound effects that I wanted to put in there anyway. I'm already planning on doing some Foley, so there'll be some clothing things and things of that nature. So it sounds like a pretty exciting project. But all right, it looks like a few more comments have come in. So Mark says there's a Facebook page that talks about changing out antennas on the G3, G4. So there's some things to look at there. All right, here we have Aaron. Hello, no question. I just wanted to thank you for incredibly produced videos. They've helped immensely. Love and greetings from the UK. Well, thanks so much, Aaron. It's good to have you here. All right. Hi, Curtis. What do you use to protect the blimp when raining and rain sound? I've only shot out in the rain once or twice. Fortunately, it was light enough that we didn't have a problem with that. I think this question came up before. There's a product you can use to protect your microphone during rainstorms, but I'm not sure what happens in terms of sound. Pretty sure it's going to pick up the rain sound still. So it'll protect the blimp, but you may pick up, the sound of rain hitting this barrier material, whatever it is. I do use the Rycote Cyclone, and I think that can actually handle a bit more precipitation than some of the more traditional Rycote Zeppelin style covers, blimp covers, because it's a different type of material. So I fortunately haven't had to really test it to the extreme. It was just a very light rain that I had, and I could hear the rain hitting the blimp itself. Did it sound completely unnatural? No, actually, it sounded somewhat natural for that particular scene because we were basically trying to remember the exact circumstances, but it actually worked okay in that particular scene. So in some cases it can work, but if you just take a look at Gotham Sound or True Audio or Location Sound Corp, any of their websites, and just do a search there, you will find, I can't remember who makes it. I think it's PSC makes it, but I'm not positive, and I don't remember what it's called. It might be something like a hoodie, or I don't remember what it's called, but there is an option there. Do you start recording Foley after you get the cut? Definitely. Yeah, you definitely need the picture. I have never done it without having the picture. I think it's really important to have the picture. And so, yeah. Now, things like room tone, I could probably do that. And in fact, LaRon says, yeah, so I do room tone, and I did capture room tone. Here's the thing. Oh, yeah, I wanted to talk about this. This is not a bash session, so I want to be clear about that. But I was not surprised, but it kind of confirmed something that I had experienced in the past. We shot with a Red Epic W with the Helium 8K sensor. That's what the piece was shot on. And what has always struck me about Red cameras is that they have these ridiculously loud fans. They have two very small, high RPM fans in them. And the way the newer ones work, the older ones, I don't know if the older ones did this, but the newer ones that we used, at least, you had settings in the menu, so you could tell it how to do the thermal management. And you had a few different options. One was basically just leave the fans on all the time, which is fine if you're not recording audio. Number two was to let the fans kind of run high RPM when you're between shots, but then as soon as you hit record, it goes into quiet mode, which means that the fans are still spinning, just not quite as fast. And then I think there was another mode you could switch it to. I wasn't entirely clear on the details, but based on the production we were doing, we couldn't necessarily afford to. I think it's basically one of those things where it will shoot as long as it can, and then it will just shut down if it gets too hot. and we couldn't afford to do that. So we use that mode where it goes into quiet mode as soon as you start recording. But because we were doing a lot of close-ups, I ended up picking up a fair bit of that fan noise, more than I certainly would have liked. We'll see what the director feels like, what Austin says once he does the cut, because he's working with that right now. But that was kind of an interesting thing, and I find that with the other cinema cameras, the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro, the fan in that one seemed like it was a lower RPM, larger fan, and it wasn't as much of a problem, but definitely with close-ups, it was a real challenge. So in any case, that's something to keep in mind is when you're going to be working on a project with a cinema, like a proper cinema camera, they almost all have fans. I think all the Alexa models have fans as well. The Reds have fans. The Ursa Mini Pro has a fan. I believe even the Canon C, I know the 200 has a fan, but it's very quiet. That one they actually did very nicely. I imagine the C300 and C700 have fans. I don't know about things like the Sony. I don't think the FS5 has a fan. I don't know about the FS7 or the higher end stuff on the Sony front. But anyway, some interesting thoughts. All right. How do you properly do voiceover more like ADR? Because I used the mic I used outside, then my MKH50 for variety choice for the editor. Was that the right choice? I'm not sure I follow entirely on that one, Laron. Oh, okay, I see. You did ADR with the MKH50, but you used a different mic when you did the actual production audio. It's a good question. It's interesting with ADR. I've heard a lot of different, not a lot, but I have several interviews with ADR engineers. And the question often comes up, okay, which microphones do you use? And some of them I've heard say, well, we try to use exactly what was used during the production. And then others say, nope, I have my favorite. We always use such and such. And in some cases, I've heard some people say the Sennheiser MKH416. I've heard MKH50. I've heard, a variety of other mics as well. So it's interesting. It really depends on the ADR engineer you talk to. So I think that's an interesting question, because I think if you're trying to match, if you're going to have, say, for example, in a scene, several lines of dialogue that you use the production audio and then one line of ADR, I would think you'd want to match the mics, or you're going to have to do some EQ to get them to match in post. So I guess it depends on the production and the ADR engineer and the post engineers, the dialogue editors, and the supervising sound editor, whatever. All of those people have to make that choice and decide how they want to handle it. But it can be done either way. You do have to do some EQ if you're going to use a different mic potentially. So I think that can be a fine choice, Laron. All right, next up from Peter. Wondering if you've recorded thunder before. Which kind of mic would you use? Looking to add some good audio and make the most of these summer storms. Okay. I just got sorry, I got distracted by the next question. All right, Peter. I have not recorded thunder before. I think what you're going to want to look for is a microphone with a good dynamic range spec on it, and you're going to want a recorder with a good dynamic range spec on it as well. You may need to, it's tricky because you can't really do like a level check, like say, okay, Thunder, go ahead and do your thing. I'm going to set my gain trim here, obviously. So you're going to have to kind of, I'm just talking about what I would do if I were doing this for the first time, which I would be doing for the first time. So I would probably gain down quite a bit. If you're using a higher quality recorder that has a very clean preamplifier and clean analog to digital converters, I would leave plenty of headroom. It might also help to have a mic with a pad on it, like a minus 10 dB pad, if you have that option as well. So those are some thoughts. I don't really know. I would think that things like what would be really interesting is to record Thunder and Lightning, or Thunder. Obviously, we're not recording the Lightning with a microphone. With something like the Sennheiser Ambio VR mic, that would be pretty interesting. Or the Rode, what is it? The NTSF, I think it's called, which is also their kind of what's the word? It's an ambisonic microphone, so it has 4 capsules on it. So if anyone else has direct experience recording Thunder, please let us know here. Thanks for the question, Peter. Okay, this is the thing I was laughing at before, Laurent. This made me this made me smile because now I know I'm not crazy. You dealt with the Dragon, so again, another red camera for the last 2 days, and it sucked, and I'm wondering how Post is going to deal with it. I do too. And in fact, I get to do Post on this project that I'm working on here, so I will have things to tell you probably. We'll definitely do some follow-up pieces on that, and let you know how it comes out. Oh, cool. Here's a response from Aaron. Aaron, Thunder is pretty difficult. I like large diaphragm condensers. The hard part is humidity. Good point. So interesting. I'm curious, Aaron, about the large diaphragm condensers. Do you like those because they have a little bit more mass to the capsule, and so they respond a little bit better to the really percussive Thunder? I'm just curious. That's an interesting choice that hadn't occurred to me. But does sound like an interesting idea. So thanks for that. All right. Okay, Production Sound Texas asks, what loudness metering do you use? I assume you mean in post. In post, I am almost always using Isotope RX. So as well, I get a couple of things. So if I'm in post, when I do the final loudness pass, that's when I'm using Isotope to do that, usually. In some cases, when I'm actually mixing and I'm working in the multi-track view, and I just have a clip that's kind of like way quieter or way louder or whatever than everything else that I'm mixing with, I may drop over into the waveform editor and drop into the match loudness panel at that point. So I'll use that there. But then on the final mix, I use the loudness tools in Isotope RX. So that's generally what I'm doing. Thanks for the question, Production Sound Texas. Thanks for coming by. All right, back to Laurent. I used a shotgun outside and a condenser inside, and they wanted me to do ADR because there were generators everywhere. Oh, okay, I see. So were those wild lines on the actual production, and you actually went inside and kind of just recorded the lines again? That's interesting. Yeah, that can be really helpful when you've got generators outside everywhere and you're fighting with those. Getting wild lines is really nice. Now in post, they can do a lot with a wild line. It's not easy, having done some post, to kind of chop up an individual line into individual words and make it sound natural. But wild lines can be a lifesaver. So that can be really, really helpful. All right, and back to Aaron. So yes, Aaron is using that. So using the large diaphragm condenser with matched pencils in a pseudo mid-side style setup. Okay, I see. That makes sense. Cool. Yeah, so that large diaphragm condenser, that's an interesting idea that hadn't occurred to me. So that may be better suited, Peter, for your question about recording Thunder. Something to consider for sure. All right. Okay, before I get to your question, Thomas, that's a good question about normalizing audio, loudness normalizing. Before I move on, 16.1, DaVinci Resolve 16.1 has I think it's a new feature. I don't believe I saw it there before. In our productions yesterday, we shot with timecode. We used a tentacle sync on the Epic. And of course, I was using my Sound Devices 633. So I jam synced the tentacle to the 633, attached that to the Epic. And our editor today was saying, hey, how do I sync this up in Resolve? And I thought that there was only a way to actually choose the video clip and the associated audio clip and then right click and say, hey, sync this up based on timecode. Turns out there's a way to do it batch. You can basically throw everything into a bin and just say, sync these up. And evidently it does it. So I have yet to try that myself, but he claims that that's what it did. So I'm pretty excited about that. That'll be a nice step forward for sure. Okay, back to Thomas's question. For Fairlight in Resolve 16, is there a straightforward way to normalize volume to minus 23 LUFS? Is it the same as in 15? So I should rewatch part of your Fairlight course. As far as I know, it's the same. I'm actually, this project that I'm talking about here tonight, I am going to mix it in Fairlight if everything goes well. So we are on 16.1 now. I think the course was actually made when I was using version 15 early this year. So we will let you know if there's a new way. I believe in terms of loudness metering in Resolve, they updated things, but it is still one of those that you have to basically listen through the entire thing to get your integrated loudness spec, which is basically why I use Isotope, because I can actually do that in one pass. And it doesn't do it in real time. It actually scans through the entire mix or whatever you sent over to Isotope, takes it, it chugs on it for a while, but it's a lot faster than having to listen through the entire piece. If you're talking about mixing even a 10-minute video, or short film, that can take quite a while to listen to it back in real time and get an integrated loudness measure. So there's something to consider there. All right. Moving back up here. Okay, thanks for that question, Thomas. Next from Mark. I laughed. Laurent thought he was talking about his wife when he said he had to deal with the dragon for the last 2 days. Okay, I'm not touching that one. Back to Rashad. Okay, what's a wild line? Great question. A wild line is when you record a line of dialogue while you're not recording camera. And normally what you do this is when, just like what Laurent was talking about, if you have a situation where you recorded the production audio during the filming and the acting, and you know that there was a problem with one of the lines of dialogue, you might ask permission to take that actor and go record a wild line. So get them off the set, or potentially stay on set, depending on what the problem was. But in Laurent's case, they were dealing with a whole bunch of generators that there was no way to change that. So they went inside to get away from the generators and then recorded that line. So in post, they can take that wild line and hopefully match it up to the actual footage at some point. So that's the idea with a wild line. All right, going back to thunder. Aaron, I don't hit the pad. Thunder comes and goes pretty quickly. The worst part is that it's an electrical storm. So there's some risks. Surge protect your equipment before thinking about sound. Good points. Booms make great lightning rods. Yeah, that is a fantastic point. You definitely have to be thinking about safety, so be careful where you do that. All right, so thanks from Peter in regards over to Aaron for the tips on recording thunder. And Laurent, I've heard some magic done in the post lab. Haha, that's true. All right. You can use Isotope RX to do a quick normalized leveler your audio. Also, you can use Wave's MV2 broadcast preset. Very good. Thank you for that. So we have some more options out there. All right. And then finally, back to Thunder with Aaron. You're welcome. Thunder's one of those rare sound caps that everything has to be perfect. But when you do get it, add it to your personal sound library. It'll be worth it. You'll always have it. All right. And then back to Laurent. Yes, they were wild lines, and I thought that was what why was I here? Because the whole project was outside and had a person hanging from a parachute out of a tree. It was a perfect challenge project for me. Wow. Yeah. That does sound like a fun one. All right. All right. Got another question here from Shakir. Hey Curtis, really appreciate your videos. Have you ever used the Blackmagic Ultra Studio Mini Recorder? If so, did you ever use it as a capture device for live videos such as this stream? Yes, I did. I had a lot of issues with it. And I've actually switched. I don't want to lift, well, maybe I can try to lift this up and see if I can show you. I'm now using an AJA UTAP, HDMI version. I also have the BNC or the SDI version. I actually prefer I've had better luck with the AJA with my particular setup, which is a Panasonic GH5, and I feed that into my iMac, and then that's coming through an app called Ecamm Live. This one has just worked more reliably. The interesting thing about the Ultra Studio Mini Recorder was that when it worked, it was great. But there were a lot of circumstances where I just couldn't get it working. And so since I try to schedule these live streams ahead of time, if I was fighting with that thing and not going live on time because of that thing, yeah, it was a very frustrating experience. So I don't know if it was, what it was about the setup that wasn't working well. I don't know if it was something about the camera. Maybe I have a faulty device. Maybe, it's only compatible with certain things. I'm not sure, but in any case, it wasn't working with my setup of the other ecosystem in which I was trying to use it. So that's why I'm using this AJA. The problem is the AJA is a lot more expensive. I believe like at least twice the price. If I remember correctly, it's about $300, whereas the Ultra Studio Mini Recorder is about $150. So that was a little bit of an exercise in frustration, but that's what I'm using now, and that was my experience with the Ultra Studio. If anyone else has a better experience with it, if you'd let us know which which camera and which software you were using to do that, that'd be great. How do you feel about the Mix Pre series having the SD card slot on the bottom? Because I got a SD card stuck in mine. Has that happened to you? I haven't had that problem on mine. I have heard some people complain that they wished it wasn't behind the battery sled because you basically have to power down if you're powering with a battery sled, as opposed to on the smaller Mix Pre's via USB-C, or on the bigger one via the Hiroshi input. So I haven't had any get stuck. I don't mind having it on the back because basically I'm only pulling it out at the end of the day. And even at the end of the day, I don't generally pull it out. When I'm getting ready to offload to either a DIT or the director or whomever, I usually pull out, I'm using the Mix Pre 10T, so I get the backup to a USB stick on the side. I pull that out and we use that to give them the copies of all the clips for the day. So that is a bummer about getting that stuck in the card slot, but that's one I haven't tried. All right. Any location sound guys using USB to high-res battery power options? Great inexpensive hack, by the way. I would be interested to know more about that. Yeah, I'd be interested to know kind of some of the particulars about that. If you're willing to share, I'd love to do that. Okay. I don't know why M2 hasn't had a more widespread uptake, to be honest. Not sure what that, I'm sorry, I've lost the context on that one. Oh, Carlos here says, I use an Anker 20100P power bank with the USB-C cable. It lasts a full production day. That's similar to the one I use. I don't remember if mine is that exact one. It's called the Power Core, and it works beautifully. And yeah, for a Mix Pre 6, I was able to power for a long time with that thing. So that was one option I did use, Aaron, to answer your question. But I haven't used any USB to Hi-Res or Hiroshi. And Tricep Bra, you have the same microphone they have on the Joe Rogan show. It's true. This is probably one of the more ubiquitous microphones you'll see in shows nowadays where they're live broadcasting. Shure SM7B. And I like to think that he has it, the same microphone as me, not the other way around. Just kidding. He actually had his first, so in any case. Okay, Shakir, thanks, makes sense. Yeah, I currently use the Elgato Camlink 4K, and it does work quite well considering the cost size. It doesn't do hardware encoding, but works fine in my setup, even at 4K. Okay, yeah, actually Elgato contacted me and asked me if I wanted to try it, and we just haven't made the arrangements yet. That is a much less expensive option, and it can do up to 4K, which is a plus. So if you want to do 4K, if you have the bandwidth to support that. So thanks for that, Shakir. All right, Zoom F6 question of the week. Has Zune given you any idea when they plan to release it? Yes, I'm told that last I heard, and this was a couple of weeks ago, it is supposed to start shipping in October in the United States. I don't know about the rest of the world, but I understand, at least in the US here, it's supposed to start shipping in October. For those that aren't aware, they ran into what I'm told is they ran into some manufacturing issues, and it had to do with a physical part. From what I got, this is from Samuel Green from Zoom, basically saying we had a problem with one of the physical mechanisms, and I don't know what it was, but they were having problems with it, so they decided to go back and redesign it and then start manufacturing over. So that's why there was the delay, they say. So I don't know exactly what it was, but October is what I hear. So there we go. All right, 32-bit field recording is about to change the game. This is an interesting topic, and I don't know all the answers to it. But there are a lot of engineers that, when I did my Zoom F6 kind of preview piece, basically said 32-bit is useless. And I don't entirely understand everything about all of this. But what I can say is this. My understanding, or my guess, this is a guess, is that in the case of the Zoom F6, the reason they probably went with 32-bit recording is because there is unity. So the way the F6 works is you don't have a gain trim. There's no setting gain. It just applies a unity gain. So it's sort of optimized. It's using some level, whatever it is, that's optimized for that preamp and applying that gain. Then it uses the two analog to digital converters, one to get the higher amplitude sound, one to get the lower amplitude sound. And then it takes all that entire dynamic range and sends that off to a 32-bit float wave file. So I think that the reason that they use 32-bit float is because you don't have a way to sort of optimize the gain. But again, I'm starting to get outside of my area of expertise here. And I think it's because you don't have the ability to set the gain that it needs that entire 32 bits. Normally, you wouldn't need that. If you're setting the gain, you wouldn't need that because the dynamic range that 24-bit can cover is broader than than basically all the microphones and all the preamplifiers and analog to digital converters out there can cover anyway. So that's the argument that I hear. So there are some thoughts. I don't know all the answers on that front, to be honest. And Aaron says here, for example, 32-bit isn't useless for Thunder. That's a good point. So in any case, there are some thoughts on that. Aaron, one question I did have, how are you liking that gorgeous Rodecaster now you've had it for a while? I love it, but the problem I have is that I haven't had very many opportunities to use it. I've just been so strapped for all the other projects I've been working on. But I really, really, really was impressed by the Rodecaster Pro. It's a surprisingly good piece of gear. And I think it's especially awesome for people that want quality audio for their podcast or whatever they're doing that don't have a lot of knowledge of how to operate sound gear. So, but they've also done a nice job since the release of updating the firmware. So for those of us that do know a little bit more about audio, they've kind of opened up a lot of the settings so that we can kind of dial it in a little bit better. So that's an awesome thing as well. All right, what do you think about Julian Krause's EQ hack to use their less expensive mic as a substitute for the SM7B? Good enough for a lot of circumstances, or probably not good enough? I think that's only an answer that someone who's producing a piece can answer for their production, for their particular piece. You can make a lot of microphones sound like a Shure SM7B. There's no question about that. So I think it can be a legitimate approach. But if you don't have a lot of time to turn something around, then that's probably a case for investing in a Shure SM7B. But if you just want that sound, yeah, it can be good enough, depending on what the source material is, what the source recording sounds like. If you have a really awful mic that's not capturing certain frequencies, you can't make them come there. You can't make them appear with EQ. If they weren't there, no amount of EQ is going to change that. But if it's relatively close, I think it's definitely a possibility. All right. Oh, here's Peter says that uses the Blackmagic Decklink 4K capture card. So, of course, you need a PCI Express slot. Fairly successfully, currently with a Nikon Z6, but ordered a cheapy Panasonic G7 for a more permanent setup. Cool. And it sounds like you've had a good thing. Have you tried the Senken CSM1? I've shortlisted it as a possible upgrade. I think that's the really short shotgun, if I'm not mistaken, Carlos. And yeah, I have, just on the show floor, I haven't had a chance to really use it on a production. But if you're interested in hearing what it sounds like, and maybe you've already heard this, but Michael Wynn over on his channel did a comparison of that versus the CS3E. Definitely worth a listen. It doesn't have nearly as tight a polar pattern as the C3E, of course, but CS3E, I think is the right number, model number. So in any case, there's something to check out there. We've got just a couple more minutes. We're going to wrap up here. Mark Owens, I powered my F8n with a portable Blackmagic cinema camera battery mount for Sony from eBay. 14.4 volt, used all day and had 75% battery left using 3 wireless and a boom. Wow. That is pretty awesome. So we'll have to check that out. Thanks for that info, Mark. Is it just me, but my G3 versus my Electrosonics with the same mix sound different? Does that happen to you? Absolutely, yeah. I mean, well, I'm curious. Laron, are you using the same exact mics on both the G3 and the Electro? And yeah, I think there's still a possibility you're going to get some different sound, but I'm curious. If they're using definitely if the G3 is using the mic that came with it, yeah, that mic is not amazing, in my opinion. And actually, I talked to some of well, I can't, never mind, I'm not going to say that. But in any case, yeah, I'm not a fan of that. The MK2 mic, I think that's what it's called. Yeah, the MK2. The original one in particular. The MK2 Mark II is a little bit better. But the high frequencies are just a mushy kind of weird, not mushy, but this, I don't know, something doesn't sound right about them. Okay. And then Laron has also powered a MixPre 6 with a USB Anchor battery, but now you use high-Q batteries, so the smart batteries. Okay, cool. All right, Aaron, you should have Carrie on one of these live streams. Perfect excuse to showcase it more. I'm really wanting to get one, but I don't podcast, so it would be ornamental. Well, I appreciate the discipline that you're exercising there to not purchase something that you know would only be ornamental. I would love to carry on more. Unfortunately, we live in cities that are about 350 miles apart, so we don't get to work together quite as often as I would like, but we will definitely make a try to do that. Quick questions. I have a MixPre 10T and absolutely love it, but do you know if there is a way, like on the F8n, to mute a channel instantly? I did like the on-off buttons on the F8. So there's not a one-button way to do it as far as I'm aware on the unit itself. If you are using the app, I think you might be able to mute it right away. I'm not positive. I need to check on that, Shakir, but that's one worth checking. If you're using the Wingman app, you might be able to. Otherwise, you do have to press the channel button and then disarm it or mute. Can you mute it? Let's check right now. Let's see if I can mute it. I just muted it. So yeah, you do have to press the channel button, then the mute button. I think the app might be able to do that. So good question. Mark, there is the actual unit that he's using there, the BPU 60. Very good. Thanks for that again, Mark. I did some audio on the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air trailer, and there's a part where they were outside and cicadas noises everywhere, and it sounded good. How do you think they did it? Oh, you listen. I assume you mean you listened to some audio. Well, there's something interesting, and we'll close up with this. Yesterday on the shoot we were doing, one of the things was I needed to use Rode microphones for the contest entry because it's the Rode Reel film contest. So in any case, I was using the NTG3. And what's interesting about shotgun microphones that I've found over time is that with shotgun microphones, the off-axis sound can do weird things. And I think that's part of the reason that a lot of mixers will now use supercardioid mics instead, non-shotgun microphones, especially indoors, but even in some cases outdoors, because at least some of them seem to have voicing and whatever's been engineered into them, such that the off-axis sound sounds a little bit more natural. If you look at a polar pattern graph for a lot of shotgun microphones, especially if it's one of the more detailed ones that shows the response pattern at different frequencies, you will find that shotgun microphones in many cases have very, very different polar patterns at different frequencies. And so what that can mean, for example, when I was booming yesterday outdoor at the house, when a car passed by, it made this kind of weird sound that didn't sound like the actual car. It had this sort of swishy sound to it. So kind of all feeding back to Laurent, I wonder if they could have done a couple things. Number one, they could have used a microphone that handled the off-axis sound very nicely. They could also have done some intentional sound design there. So maybe they recorded the cicadas separately and it wasn't actually there on production. I don't know. But those are some thoughts on different ways that you could achieve that potentially. So, all right. And then Laurent confirmed. All right. Unfortunately, I have to get going. I have another appointment I need to run to. Thanks, everybody, for the questions this time. Get out there and make some great sound, and we'll talk to you all again very soon.